and that means the Cherokees, Cherokee people.
And the Cherokees lived in the vicinity of what are now called North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, and West Virginia. Not the whole states, but those where they came together, and this was Cherokee territory.
For a century after the conquistadors departed, Native Americans struggled to recover and reorganize. At the end of the 17th century, the Confederation of the Iroquois dominated the northern mountains, whereas in central Appalachia, the Shawnee and the Miami were predominant. And in southern Appalachia, protected by the high mountains from the worst of the early epidemics, the Cherokee Nation emerged as the principal tribe.
For the Cherokee and for a lot of indigenous people, mountains are nurturing places and places where they're protected. They're sacred in many cultures because they're literally sources of life, because life-giving waters come from them. There's a Cherokee elder, Jerry Wolf, who talks about how the mountains are sacred to us as the Cherokee, and the mountains take care of us and we take care of them, and there's a reciprocal arrangement.
And all of the mountain peaks we see, and particularly this one behind me, Whiteside Mountain, but just about all of the major mountains were sacred mountains, and there are legends that the Cherokees had about these mountains.
That spirits lived in the mountains, and that the wonderful story about the animals and the plants.
And it was told to me by my relatives as I was growing up. It said in the very early days that the Cherokees began to make blowguns and bows and arrows and spears. And they began to kill the animals in abundance and without appreciation. And they continued to the point that the animals were almost annihilated. But the animals decided they were going to come back and go to war against man.
The animals hold a Congress, and they decide what they're going to do about men, because men are encroaching upon them. They're taking up their living space.
And so the old bear was chief of the animal tribe, and so he decided to make bows and arrows and spears, and he was going to do to man what they were doing to them. But the problem was that the animals couldn't use those weapons, and the old bear tried to shoot the bow and arrow, but he kept cutting the string with his claws. And
finally, the bears just kind of shrug their shoulders, and they sort of walk off without taking revenge.
But the little smaller animals just continued on, and the insects, and they decided to go out in the forest and gather diseases. And so they went out and they gathered such things as rabies, and the mosquitoes got the malaria, and the ticks picked up diseases, and all these creatures began to bring the diseases into men, and the man began to die.
But then the plants came along and said, well, they liked the people.
All of a sudden, the Great Spirit felt sorry for man, and so he talked to the plant world, and he told the plants to invent a cure for all those diseases that the animals had found.
Like the sassafras. When you get a stain, and all you got to do is get those fresh leaves and just rub them up together and then let the juice from those leaves.
Of course, one of the great things that the first settlers here discovered was some of the ways that the Cherokees used those plants to heal. And I think that just that myth itself gives you a sense that the animals, the plants, the human beings, all were associated in their mind.